The mid-60s in Australia and New Zealand were a time of musical rebellion. While early local bands were inspired by the Beatles' pop melodies and clean-cut image, by the mid-60s a generation of young Australians was seeking a wilder and more aggressive sound. And the arrival of bands like the Rolling Stones, the Yardbirds and the Pretty Things gave them exactly the kind of music they were looking for. Fueled by this influence, a wave of fuzz-driven homegrown bands began crafting their own raw and ferocious music, eventually releasing some of the wildest singles of the era, and in some cases, even breaking new ground with innovative sounds and ideas. So without further ado, get ready to explore the untamed sound of 60s Australia and New Zealand. Let's begin. When it comes to the proto-punk sounds of the 60s, Social End Product by the Bluestars ranks among the wildest. But it's not just the sound that defines its proto-punk status. The lyrics sneer at authority, conformity, and societal expectations.
I get a label as an angry young man because I don't fit into the master plan.
The lyrics capture a youthful defiance that could have landed just as easily on a Sex Pistols or Dead Boys record a decade later. The Bluestars were a social end product of the inner suburbs of Auckland, New Zealand's largest city. After releasing an unsuccessful single for Decca Records in early 1966, the group got signed to Allied International, and they released their proto-punk anthem Social End Product in December of that year. The defiant lyrics, which were written by the group's guitarist John Harris, caused quite a stir at the time, especially a line about the Queen.
I don't stand for the cream.
The line refers to Harris's defiance in staying seated whenever the British national anthem was played in cinemas, a bold gesture in the conservative climate of mid-1960s New Zealand. It was an early flash of the anti-royalist sentiment later made famous by punk bands like the Sex Pistols. Despite enjoying success as a club band in New Zealand, their lack of chart impact led to their breakup in 1967. But Social End Product has endured as a proto-punk classic, a cult anthem that has appeared on numerous garage rock compilations over the years and inspired cover versions by bands all over the world. This intense fuzz-drenched track by the Black Diamonds is one of the finest slabs of garage punk that Australia ever produced in the 60s. The track was released as a B-side in November 1966, and it captures the group exploring the same kind of tough, guitar-driven psychedelia that British bands like the Yardbirds were experimenting with during that period. The song features an overdriven instrumental break complete with pounding jungle rhythms and a lightning-fast guitar solo by lead guitarist Alan Ollerman, who also wrote the track. The Black Diamonds were formed in 1959 when several members of the group were 12 and 13 years old. They started out playing surf and rockabilly instrumentals, but the arrival of the British invasion in the mid-60s prompted them to find a lead singer and change their musical approach. After gaining a good reputation as a live band around the New South Wales area, the Black Diamonds were signed to Festival Records and released this explosive B-side in November 1966. The A-side was also a good song called See the Way.
See the way, see the way, see the way she's talking with him.
The track was not as impactful as the A-side, but it's an excellent surf-tinged song with a fantastic atmospheric sound.
See the way, see the way, see the way he's kissing her.
Despite missing the national charts, the single earned strong local popularity. After moving to Sydney and touring with bands like the Easybeats, the group released their final single in March 1967 and decided to change their name to Timepiece in 1968. The Missing Links are widely regarded as one of the wildest Australian bands of the 60s, and this tune called You're Driving Me Insane stands as one of the most sonically aggressive songs of 1965, not just in Australia but anywhere. The track was released as an A-side in August 1965, and it perfectly captured the raw and anarchic sound that made them famous in clubs all over the country. The Missing Links wore their hair longer than everyone else and rejected mainstream conformity. Their live shows were insanely chaotic, with extended feedback rave-ups, auto-destruction, and instruments smashed into amps. But most important of all, the group took chances and experimented, resulting in some truly groundbreaking material that sounded unlike anything else from 1965. After the release of You're Driving Me Insane, the group released one of the most uncommercial singles of the entire 60s. The Beatles often get credited as the first band to experiment with backward tapes, but both sides of this Missing Links single from October 1965 predated the Beatles' experiments by nearly a year. It was a 6-minute, 40-second version of Keep Your Big Mouth Shut, played backwards and split across two sides of a 45. It was truly an avant-garde release, and it's remarkable that Philips Records agreed to issue it in 1965, long before psychedelia and studio experimentation had entered the mainstream. The Missing Links caused a major stir, and they were banned from several television programs for their image and sound. Their lone LP has since become a cult classic, but You're Driving Me Insane remains their defining song. The band's influence echoed long after, shaping Australia's punk explosion of the late 70s. Most famously, the Saints paid tribute to the Missing Links by covering Wild About You on their debut album. Another outstanding Australian track from the mid to late 60s was this track by the Atlantics, released as a single in March 1967. The Atlantics were formed in Sydney in 1961, and they started out as an instrumental surf band.
These are the Atlantics and Crusher!
The group scored a massive hit in 1963 with a self-penned track called Bombera. The song hit #1 in Australia, was covered by several overseas acts, and remains a classic of the surf genre to this day. But by the time the British invasion came along, instrumental numbers quickly fell out of fashion, so the band decided to reinvent themselves. They toughened up their sound, ditched the suits and ties, and recruited veteran rocker Johnny Reb as lead vocalist. And with a new lineup and a new updated sound, the Atlantics released this blistering single called Come On. It's a fuzz-driven, high-energy track with pounding drums, urgent vocals, and a fantastic gritty edge. Compared to their earlier surf instrumentals, it sounds almost like a different group. It's more in tune with the garage explosion in the US and the harder sounds emerging from Britain. While not a chart success, Come On has since been rediscovered by garage collectors and has been featured on Australian garage punk compilations like Down Under Nuggets and Ugly Thing. And it even earned a place on the second Nuggets box set, cementing its reputation as a garage rock classic. The La-Di-Dahs were one of many New Zealand bands in the mid-60s whose musical direction changed dramatically after groups like the Rolling Stones and the Pretty Things toured the country in 1965. From that point on, they toughened their sound and adopted a raw, fuzz-driven style with strong rhythm and blues influences. This track was released as a single in May 1966, and it's a perfect example of the group's musical shift, as well as a highlight of this period in their career. The song was originally recorded in the US by a group called The Changing Times, but the version by the La-Di-Das turned the track into a snarling, high-energy garage anthem. Dave Miller's biting vocal delivery and the band's fuzz-driven guitar attack gave the song a toughness that stood out from the polished pop dominating the charts. The single became a top 10 hit in New Zealand and helped cement the group's reputation as one of the most exciting bands in the country. Just like many groups of the era, the La-Di-Das continued to evolve with the times, and after experimenting with psychedelia in 1967 and 1968, the group released The Happy Prince, New Zealand's first rock opera. In the early 70s, they shifted towards both blues rock and hard rock before eventually disbanding in 1975. How Is the Air Up There gained cult status later in the 80s, when forgotten gems of the 60s were rediscovered on compilations of obscure garage singles, and the song has become a cult classic among enthusiasts of garage rock from the 60s. Along with the Easybeats, the Masters Apprentices are widely regarded as one of the best and most important Australian bands of the 60s. Initially formed as the Mustangs, the group changed its name to the Masters Apprentices in 1965 and released their first single in 1966. And both sides of this debut single are highly regarded by aficionados of Australian music from the 60s. The A-side was a gritty rhythm and blues number called Undecided.
I wanna be your shoe-loving man, baby.
And the B-side was another fantastic song called War or the Hands of Time. This was the first Australian song to directly address the issue of the Vietnam War, which at the time was affecting the lives of many young Australians because of the controversial introduction of conscription in 1965. This B-side has become one of their most celebrated songs from the era, but the track featured on this video is the A-side of their second single. Released in May 1967, Buried and Dead was written by guitarist Mick Bauer and stands as one of the band's rawest and most aggressive cuts. The single spent 8 weeks on the Go Set National Top 40, peaking at number 26, and it also reached the top 10 in several Australian capital cities. The Masters Apprentices went on to enjoy major success in Australia through the late 60s and early 70s, releasing 5 full-length albums before disbanding in 1973. Buried and Dead remains one of the grittiest highlights of their early career, and like so many proto-punk classics, it was rediscovered by a new generation of fans in the 1980s through compilations of Australian garage rock from the 60s. Another garage and proto-punk classic from 60s Australia is this blistering track called By My Side, which was released as a B-side in May 1967 by the Elois. The group was formed in Maryborough, Victoria, and they started gaining popularity after catching the ear of DJ Graham Lever, who encouraged them to move their base to Melbourne. And in 1967 they entered Bill Armstrong's studios and recorded their first and only single. The A-side was an excellent cover of I'm a Man by Bo Diddley, driven by fuzz-drenched guitar and wild feedback. But the B-side is the track that truly stands out. By My Side is a self-penned song that explodes with teenage urgency, a fuzz-driven garage rocker brimming with restless desire. The Elois promoted the record with a handful of television appearances, and it even made a dent in the lower Melbourne charts, helped by the band's reputation as a live group. But still, the single never broke nationally, and before long the members had disbanded and returned to ordinary life. Their music might have been forgotten altogether if not for a Melbourne record collector who in 1980 compiled the song alongside other forgotten Aussie gems from the mid-60s on a now legendary compilation called Ugly Things. Since then, By My Side has become a cult favourite among garage rock fans worldwide, and original copies of the single are now fiercely sought after, often fetching sky-high prices on collector markets like Discogs and eBay. And speaking of the Ugly Things compilation, this track by The Creatures is the one that gave the collection its name.
Can you imagine what it feels like down and out?
The Creatures were formed in 1965 in Mildura, Victoria, originally under the name The Beagle Boys. In 1966, they changed their name to The Creatures and moved to Sydney, where they became active in the city's music scene. At a time when moderate long hair was starting to be accepted, the band dyed their hair in shocking pastel colours, inviting media outrage, and they were billed as the wildest group in Australia and as Australia's answer to the Rolling Stones. Ugly Thing was released as a single in 1967, and the song reveals influences from bands like the Stones, the Yardbirds and the Who, but the Creatures were far from mere imitators. The song opens with an almost proto-metal riff. And it soon moves into a more psychedelic, guitar-driven section, which is reminiscent of bands like the Yardbirds. After this interlude, the song erupts into a storm of feedback and fuzz guitar, creating a thrilling, chaotic climax. The single was probably too far out to achieve commercial success, and by December 1967, the band had relocated to Melbourne and renamed themselves Chocolate, releasing one last single before finally disbanding in 1969.
I'm your wish doctor, 'cause the evil life, 'cause the power never hurts, I'm a coaching guy.
The Chants R&B were formed in 1964 in Christchurch, New Zealand. According to drummer Trevor Courtney, the group came together after its members were blown away by the Rolling Stones' debut album, so the group adopted a wild rhythm and blues style, which grew even more aggressive and anarchic after they saw the Pretty Things perform live in New Zealand in 1965. The Chants became one of the most exciting live bands in New Zealand, with a set that mixed wild rhythm and blues numbers with soul material by artists such as Otis Redding. And as time went on, fuzzboxes and feedback-laced rave-ups also became an essential part of their sound and live act. After releasing their first single in March 1966, the Chants entered the studio again later that year to record their second single, which was issued in December. The A-side was a cover of the song I'm Your Witch Doctor by John Mayall. This cover by the Chants abandoned the blues purist approach of the original version in favour of an unhinged and anarchic rhythm and blues style, which was closer to the garage rock sounds of the 60s, rather than the bluesy and rootsy approach of John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. The B-side was another excellent rhythm and blues type of number called Neighbour Neighbour.
Neighbor, neighbor, stay away from my door. Neighbor, neighbor, I've told it before.
Shortly after releasing the single, the Chants moved to Melbourne, but the group soon split up due to musical differences. Even though they only issued 2 singles, the Chants remain one of the finest examples of 60s garage rock and rhythm and blues from Australasia. And both sides of the single have appeared on various compilations over the years, with the A-side even appearing on the second Nuggets box set.
Countryman friends, let me your ears, I'll tell you a tale of 50 years.
As As mentioned earlier in the video, the Easybeats are one of the most important and successful Australian bands of the 60s. After an initial period of success in Australia, the group decided to move to the UK. While in Britain, the Easybeats issued their most successful single, Friday on My Mind. The song became a worldwide hit, reaching number 6 in the UK, number 1 in Australia, and landing in the top 10 in several European countries. And it was also a hit in the United States, where it peaked at number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100. The group never quite topped the success of Friday on My Mind, but they stayed popular until their breakup in 1969. After the split, band members Harry Vanda and George Young formed a powerful songwriting and production team. And with George being the older brother of Malcolm and Angus Young, the link to AC/DC was inevitable. Together with Harry Vanda, George Young went on to produce the first 6 studio albums by AC/DC. And that connection is part of the reason this video highlights their 1969 single St. Louis. The song clearly seems to anticipate the sound that AC/DC would popularize later in the 70s. Just listen to that riff. The single peaked at number 21 in Australia and number 57 in Canada. In the United States, it peaked at number 72 according to Cashbox, but the single failed to chart in the UK. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments which tracks were your favorites, or share other gems from Australia and New Zealand that you think could have made the list. See you next time.